we focus on following what followed the mounting calls for President Cyril Ramaphosa to initiate a cabinet reshuffle. The president on Wednesday announced some changes and appointments to the cabinet. It comes after several ministers came under fire for a lack of oversight and accountability during the unraveling of parts of Gauteng and KwaZulu-Natal. To look into the cabinet changes, we're joined by Professor of Public Leadership from the University of Stellenbosch and Professor Zwelinzima Ndevu and the political analyst there to give us some insight on the latest. Dr. Ntsikelelo Breakfast also joining in there. Gentlemen, a very good morning to you. Thank you so much for your time. A lot of people, Dr. Breakfast, will say that this was a long time coming. But it was a long time coming because there were some trigger points that forced the president to indeed make these changes. Was it strategic? Was it a PR move? What could have really prompted the president to finally say, okay, I'm making the changes?
Yeah, so there had been some vacancies within the executive institution with regard to the death of the former Minister of Presidents, Jackson Tembu, and also the issue of Dr. Mkhize was not clear whether he was coming back or not. So I think that created a scope for these appointments. Over and above that, the mere fact that there was a slow pace of response to the outbreak of violence signifies that there is a problem with regard to the security architecture of the country. Otherwise, a government would have intercepted the threats, both to national security and also to human security. The other issue is that I'm just giving you, the background to the story. Yeah. The other issue is that there was a task team that was appointed. I can't remember when it was, to uncover the truth about what had happened with regard to the security apparatus. And the findings were handed over to Minister Ayanda Jojo, but she did not implement those findings. So what I'm saying is that there had been problems, and I think that justifies why the president had to restructure his team or his cabinet.
Professor, moving to you, we heard the president signaling the depth of his disappointment in the failure of security forces to act when they needed to act during the chaos that unfolded in Gauteng and KZN. Do you think that was enough for the president to make this move and, which saw ministers being sworn in just yesterday?
Yes, I think the lack of responsiveness, the lack of proactiveness within the state security cluster really compelled the president to do something about that. And this was the reconfiguration of government and also the strengthening of that particular cluster. So if you have a cluster that is very important, that has a responsibility to protect national interest, to protect South African citizens and everything that is property of the government of the country and private individual failing, then you have a serious challenge in your hand. And I think that alone would prompt any president to act, and the president has acted in that sense.
And Dr. Breakfast, when it comes to the question of a more wider reason why the president would have wanted to make these moves and the importance of gaining public confidence at a time such as COVID-19 on the back of those unrest and the chaos that we saw across Gauteng and KwaZulu-Natal, could this also be a conversation around the careful thinking on ways to regain public confidence?
Of course, because I think one of the responsibilities of government is to protect its citizens. And if people can do as they please, they break laws, they get away with murder, surely that is a matter of concern. So I do agree with what you are saying, that the thinking behind the restructuring that we have seen of the cabinet is also to instill some confidence in the citizens.
And Professor, what are your thoughts around that and the importance of the President making this move now to ensure that there is some sort of public confidence?
I think we would remember that there's always been an outcry that the President does not act. The President, you remember when the President came into office, there was this notion of a new dawn. There was this notion that things are going to change. And people were getting impatient with the President not acting. And the President had at some point to act decisively. And I think this is a first step in showing that the President would want to make an intervention that talks to ensuring that government machinery works more effectively, and also to say that there is some form of accountability that would happen. If people do not perform, if people are found wanting, then the President would take decisive steps. So in that, it restores some form of confidence. It shows a government that is not only responsive, but cares. When there are crises, they can take decisions to ensure that they address some of these shortcomings. So in that sense, I think it restores confidence in the government. It also, most importantly, restores confidence in the President, and I think it gets some form of control with the realignment that he has done now.
Dr. Breakfast, when it comes to ensuring that confidence, of course, the confidence in the moves that were made come with the people that the President trusts will be those who will bring some sort of stability and some certainty to the very various positions that he's put them in. Let's talk about some of those key figures and perhaps the relationship they enjoy with the President, and the talk about factions and alliances, how the new cabinet has now, stood forward to bring some sort of representation and perhaps balance things out.
Yes, I think one of the things that I've seen of late with regard to the new appointments is the consolidation of power, because by and large, you can see that the majority of people who have been appointed are people who are aligned to the faction of the President. The other issue is that I think now it's quite clear that the President does have an upper hand in the ruling party. I think maybe he could not have done that in the beginning, just after he came out of the conference. But now I think his base has been consolidating some power, hence they've been able to let go of the SG of the ANC, and that has given him some strength to sort of like do as he pleases. So there are politics also at play, besides other, reasons of trying his level best to get the job done.
Professor Ndevu, the appointments or the factions of the President is an important one. What do you think could be the pros and cons of that appointment to, appease one side and perhaps show that the power has now moved to the other side?
The events of the past month or so have shown us that the President needs lieutenants or people besides him that he can trust and that he can also rely on. And I think that's a step that he has taken. He has appointed people that he can trust, people that he's close to, people that he knows that he can rely on, people that are within, if they are so-called faction, within his faction that he has appointed. Also, very importantly for me, is that he has appointed people that are very influential within the ruling party. If you take the Minister of Finance, for example, the new Minister of Finance, he is the head of the economic transformation within the ruling party. So this allows this allows better coordination with the project or the views of the ruling party being translated easily into government. And that talks to a president that wants to realign, wants to consolidate, wants to ensure that he has people that he can trust, he has people that he can work with in government. If you look at also Mondli Ngugubele, I think in my view, he's a super minister, the minister in the presidency. And we know he is a loyal foot soldier of the president. So the president has ensured that he puts his people there that he can trust and rely upon.
Can trust and rely on. Elections are around the corner, and I suppose the citizens of South Africa and supporters of the ANC should then get some sort of confidence within the leadership under President Cyril Ramaphosa. Do you think that we could perhaps see a change in what was initially anticipated would be the fate of the party come polls?
Yeah, I'm not sure, Paul, if we are going to see a change for the better. We might see a change for the worse. And I want to maybe slightly disagree with my colleague, Professor Ndevu, and say that, sometimes, in my view, the president plays into the hands of his political enemies, in the sense that, on the one hand, he says that he's waging a war against corruption. On the other hand, he appoints people who are questionable. I think maybe there could have been some people that the president could have considered, as opposed to the minister in question. I don't think that he has a track record in government of getting the job done. I think there were other factional politics at play that made the president to make a call to appoint him. But at the same time, I also think that it's still early days. Maybe let's give him the benefit of a doubt. Maybe he can surprise us.
Would you like to respond to that?
I think, in my view, if you look at it, the president has to work with what he has. And unfortunately, if you look at the cabinet, most people have stayed. Some are bigger than others. And he had to make a choice around people that have stayed within the ruling party. So I think, for me, if you look at Minister Kodongwana, who was appointed, although there has been a cloud hanging over his head, and we know that he resigned as a deputy minister of economic development. But subsequent to that, he has actually been appointed as the head of DPSA. He has been serving in a number of international posts. That tells you that in terms of the economic and financial position of the country, or strategic position, he has some form of knowledge. And I think we can leverage on that. But it is upon him, it is a responsibility upon him to ensure that, to take the South Africa into his confidence in terms of ensuring that he cleared his name, or he has dealt with these issues successfully, which I think the president would have done that due diligence before appointing him. So I do trust that the president has done that due diligence, and the man has been cleared. And therefore, I think also, for me, the most important consideration is that, unlike the previous situation where you have Minister Mboweni and the ANC talking in different languages, you would now have unison of some sort in the ruling party when it comes to economic trajectory.
Absolutely. I'd like for us to expand on this conversation as we go into some of the new portfolios and the changes that we've seen being announced there. Gentlemen, if you can just stay on the line. We're in conversation with Professor for Public Leadership from the University of Stellenbosch, Professor Zwelinzima Ndevu, as well as political analyst Dr. Ntsikelelo Breakfast. We continue with this conversation looking at issues of accountability and competency, particularly when it comes to these specific portfolios. Was the president bold enough in his decisiveness? We unpack this and more in a little bit. Stay tuned. Welcome back, and thanks for staying with us on your weekend report, where we continue to unpack the lead as we speak to the moves that were made by President Cyril Ramaphosa. Of course, yesterday we saw some ministers getting sworn in, and there were several portfolios that received some some scrutiny with the said heads being called to step down. Following that unrest that we saw spilling out, the DA and other opposition parties called for ministers of police and state security to be fired for the lack of oversight, and ministers of health for his alleged involvement in the digital vibes contracts and those irregularities. He, however, resigned moments before the president's announcement. For some time, Minister Nathi Mthethwa has faced scrutiny for his work in the sports, arts and culture portfolio. Did the president display holding ministers accountable and consider who's competent and who's not with his moves to restructure? I am still joined by Professor Ndevu as well as Dr. Breakfast, who are unpacking elements of the president's moves. We were speaking just before the break, Professor Ndevu, or perhaps let me start with Dr. Breakfast, speaking just before the break where Professor Ndevu was speaking about the cloud hanging over our new finance minister's head, where, of course, that textile scandal, more than 120 million rand. And looking at that conversation and the moves that the president made when it comes to ensuring that there is some sort of appeasement of the financial markets, let's talk a little bit then about the credentials of Enoch Godongwana, regarded as a heavyweight in the political space, and of course, he needs to ensure that he carries on from what the former finance minister Tito Mboweni has done, and relatively new to the financial markets in comparison to Finance Minister Tito Mboweni, who was the former South African Reserve Bank governor. How then will he ensure that the ratings agencies are trusting him and ensuring that he is steering the country forward?
Well, I think at the moment it is not quite clear what is going to be the policy posture of the new Minister of Finance. For instance, is it going to be expansionary fiscal policy in the light of the structural challenges that the country has, namely inequality, poverty, and so on? Or is it going to gravitate towards neoliberalism or fiscal discipline, which is basically the reduction of government expenditure? But we shall see as it goes. I think the success of any Minister of Finance depends on the whole on the response of national and international markets, because the Minister of Finance impacts on the performance of the rand, the economic performance of the country. As you know, Mpo, our economy has not been growing the way it should have. And that has been made worse, or that has been compounded by lockdown and so on. So he really has a mammoth task.
With the mammoth task lined up, Professor Ndevu, we know that since former Finance Minister Tito Mboweni took on the job in 2018, he voiced out a lot of frustrations with the inability of the ANC, well, government in all essence, on taking hard decisions when it comes to policy reforms. What do you now imagine the stance that Enoch Godongwana will need to take in ensuring that his voice is added and some changes are made?
The frustration of Minister Mboweni was always around the fact that he needs to consult before taking decisions. There is a broader consultation process, and as a Minister of Finance, you do not take decisions really on your own. And I think Minister Godongwana has some experience in that space. He has interacted with Labour as a former unionist himself. He has also interacted with other key stakeholders within the economy. So I don't see him finding that difficult to engage in that. But what might be very important, as my learned colleague has indicated, is to, right at the onset, assert himself in terms of what approach would work for him, or what approach does he prefer in terms of dealing with the known economic challenges that have been compounded by the health challenge or health pandemic and other related issues such as unemployment, inequality, and so forth and so forth. So I would think that the first thing that you would need to do is to engage with the key stakeholders within the economy, the civil society, business, and so forth, to really assert or indicate his position, what would be his position going forward. It might be really help him to also look and reflect on the tenure of Minister Mboweni and try and adjust his approach compared to that of Minister Mboweni, such as strict fiscal control. He might have to ensure that the policies that he establishes or looked at create more jobs, expand government as development program that would lead to some form of economic recovery, ensuring that international markets start to really warm up to our country. Investors look this side more. So those are the initial tasks that you would have to look at in trying to build a reputation for himself and in trying to ensure that South Africa is on a path of recovery as well.
Absolutely. Dr. Breakfast, I'd like us to now turn into the other portfolios that we saw some big changes to. Of course, the security cluster, some big changes there. And some criticism also expressed on the kind of moves the president made, taking responsibility for state security into his cabinet and appointing his longtime confidant and comrade Sydney Mufamadi. What were your thoughts around that?
Yeah, look, I mean, I also have some concerns with regard to the centralization of power in the presidents, even though there is a justification for the restructuring that has happened, because, you know, absolute power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely. So we have seen in the past, you know, since 1994, former presidents that have been accused of using the state machinery to harass their political enemies. Even the incumbent, the current president, was once accused of trying to overthrow former President Mbeki, including Tokyo and I think Matthew's Poso. Also, Msholozi was also accused of abusing intelligence to intercept information about things that are happening in the personal lives of other people. So there needs to be control measures or oversight to examine that there is no abuse of power with regard to the intelligence operations. The role of intelligence operations, in my opinion, is to intercept threats, not to violate the right of privacy of other people and use that, you know, to silence those people. So I think also Parliament, which has a responsibility to provide oversight, has to do its job.
Many will argue, you know, that it was a gamble Ramaphosa was willing to take following the assault on the state security. What are your sentiments around that, Professor Ndevu?
I think for me it's the issue of accountability. And we must know that ultimately the president has the final accountability process remains with the president. And if you have a dysfunctional unit, you have a dysfunctional component of the executive. Therefore, it is the responsibility of the president to strengthen that dysfunctional component. And clearly the state security apparent have been dysfunctional for some time. In actual fact, it doesn't start with the current president. Over the years, we've seen the services and the activities of that particular unit deteriorating. So the president had to take a firm position around that particular unit. And I think this, in terms of ensuring that it strengthens this particular unit, this was the right move. I want to agree with my colleague that over time, this might also be abused. We know that the road to hell was built with good intentions. So even with this one, there are good intentions, but we know that over time, it might lead to people seizing an opportunity to abuse it. And we must remember that when President Central or moved this to the president, he has also appointed a commission or a committee that would look at the functioning of this. And it is also very important for the president to be able to monitor this closely, the impact of this particular committee and the inputs or suggestions that will give to this unit going forward. So as a result of that, I do think that it is a calculated risk, but it's also a necessary risk that the president had to take at this point in time, so that we don't see a repeat of this. And in my view, this unrest were not people that were hungry only, were not about poverty, only unemployment. They were well coordinated, well organized, had the potential to destabilize the country. And therefore, a risk of this nature needed to be taken to address this and ensure that it doesn't occur in the future.
I suppose then, Dr. Breakfast, this begs the question, who will be South Africa's next National Assembly Speaker, because that position is now vacant?
Of course, I think then the ANC will have to make a call, and I hope that they will make a good call in terms of appointing a credible person, because Mama Thandi Modise has been appointed to be a minister. But I suspect that, I can bet my bottom dollar it will be a loyalist or a henchman of, the president, because that position also is very central in terms of, debates and the rules of parliament and so on. So you don't need someone who's going to hold that position and sabotage you.
Absolutely. And in closing, Professor Ndevu, your sentiments around there, who will be South Africa's next National Assembly Speaker?
My preference will be continuity, will be to ensure that we have a process, we don't have disruptions in terms of what is happening in the national legislature, and therefore I would strongly lean on the appointment of the Deputy Speaker, Mr. Litsono Sinoli, as the next speaker. And the reason for that is that we have these deputies to ensure that they deputize the incumbents in the position, but also that institutional memory is not lost when the incumbent moves out of office. So for me, it will be really, it should not be a brainer. It should be that the deputy, if is there available and capable and able, then that deputy must be appointed in that position.
Very well. Thank you so much, gentlemen, for your time and sharing your knowledge with us. Of course, Professor Zwelinzima Ndevu, as well as Dr. Ntsikelelo Breakfast, weighing in on some of the moves that were made by President Cyril Ramaphosa.